Section 2 of Novice by James H. Schmitz. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Section 2. So that had been Halette's trick. She found out about the crest cats, might have put in as much as a few months arranging to make the discovery of TT's origin on Jonturu seem a regrettable mischance, something no one could have foreseen or prevented. In the life banks, from what Telzey had heard of them, TT would cease to exist as an individual awareness while scientists tinkered around with the possibility of reconstructing her species. Telzey studied her aunt's carefully sympathizing face for an instant, asked Dr. Droon, "What about the other crest cats? You said were collected before they became extinct here? Wouldn't they be enough for what the life bank needs?" He shook his head. 2 immature male specimens are known to exist, and they are at present in the life banks. The others that were taken alive at the time have been destroyed, often under nearly disastrous circumstances. They are enormously cunning, enormously savage creatures, Miss Amberdon. The additional fact that they can conceal themselves to the point of being virtually indetectable except by the use of instruments makes them one of the most dangerous animals known. Since the young female which you raised as a pet has remained docile, so far, you may not really be able to appreciate that. "Perhaps I can," Telzey said. She nodded at the heavy-looking instrument standing beside the chair. "And that's—" "It's a life detector combined with a stun gun, Miss Amberdon. I have no intention of harming your pet, but we can't take chances of any animal of that type. The gun's charge will knock it unconscious for several minutes. Just long enough for me to secure it with paralysis belts." "You're a collector for the life banks, Dr. Droon." "That's correct." "Dr. Droon," Halette remarked, "has obtained a permit from the planetary moderator authorizing him to claim Tick-Tock for the University League and remove her from the planet, dear. So you see there is simply nothing we can do about the matter. Your mother wouldn't like us to attempt to obstruct the law, would she?" Halette paused. "The permit should have your signature, Telzey, but I can sign in your stead if necessary." That was Halette's way of saying it would do no good to appeal to Jonturu's planetary moderator. She'd taken the precaution of getting his assent to the matter first. "So now, if you'll just call Tick-Tock, dear," Halette went on. Telzey barely heard the last words. She felt herself stiffening slowly while the living room almost faded from her sight. Perhaps in that instant some additional new circuit had closed in her mind, or some additional new channel had been opened, for TT's purpose in tricking her into the contact with the reckless, mocking beings outside was suddenly and numbingly clear. And what it meant immediately was that she'd have to get out of the house without being spotted at it, and go someplace where she could be undisturbed for half an hour. She realized that Halette and the zoologist were both staring at her. "Are you ill, dear?" "No." Telzey stood up. It would be worse than useless to try to tell these two anything. Her face must be pretty white at the moment. She could feel it. But they assumed, of course, that the shock of losing TT had just now sunk in on her. "I'll have to check on that law you mentioned before I sign anything," she told Dr. Droon. "Why, yes." He started to get out of his chair. "I'm sure that can be arranged, Miss Amberdon." "Don't bother to call the moderator's office," Telzey said. "I brought my law library along. I'll look it up myself." She turned to leave the room. "My niece," Halette explained to Dr. Droon, who was beginning to look puzzled, "attends law school. She's always been so absorbed in her studies." "Telzey?" "Yes, Halette." Telzey paused at the door. "I'm very glad you're decided to be sensible about this, dear. But don't take too long, will you? We don't want to waste Dr. Droon's time." "It shouldn't take more than 5 or 10 minutes, Telzey told her agreeably. She closed the door behind her and went directly to her bedroom on the 2nd floor. One of her 2 valises was still unpacked. She locked the door behind her, opened the unpacked valise, took out a pocket edition law library and sat down at the table with it. She clicked on the library's view screen, tapped the clearing and index buttons. Behind the screen, one of the multiple rows of pinhead tapes shifted slightly as the index was flicked into reading position. Half a minute later, she was glancing over the legal section on which Dr. Droon had based his claim. The library confirmed what he had said. Very neat of Halette, Telzey thought. Very nasty and pretty idiotic. Even a second-year law student could think immediately of 2 or 3 ways in which a case like that could have been dragged out in Federation's courts for a couple of decades before the question of handing Tick-Tock over to the life banks became too acute. Well, Hallette simply wasn't really intelligent, and the plot to Shanghai TT was hardly even a side issue now. Telzey snapped the tiny library shut, fastened it to the belt of her sunsuit, and went over to the open window. A 2-foot ledge passed beneath the window, leading to a roof of a patio on the right. 50 yards beyond the patio, the garden ended with a natural stone wall. Behind it lay one of the big wooded park areas which formed most of the ground level of Porte-Cochet. Tick-Tock wasn't in sight. A sound of voices came from the ground floor windows on the left. Hallette had brought her maid and chauffeur along, and a chef had showed up in time to make breakfast this morning as part of the city's guest house service. Telzey took the empty valise to the window, set it on end against the left side of the frame, and let the window slide down until its lower edge rested on the valise. She went back to the house guard screen panel beside the door, put her finger against the lock button, and pushed. The sound of voices from the lower floor was cut off as outer doors and windows slid silently shut all about the house. Telzey glanced back at the window. The valise had creaked a little as the guard field drove the frame down on it, but was supporting the thrust. She returned to the window, wriggling feet foremost through the opening, twisted around, and got a footing on the ledge. A minute later, she was scrambling quietly down a vine-covered patio trellis to the ground. Even after they discovered she was gone, the guard screen would keep everybody in the house for some little while. They'd either have to disengage the screen's main mechanisms and start poking around in them, or force open the door to her bedroom and get the lock unset. Either approach would involve confusion, upset tempers, and generally delay organized pursuit. Telzey edged around the patio and started towards the wall, keeping close to the side of the house so she couldn't be seen from the windows. The shrubbery made minor rustling noises as she threaded her way through it, and then there was a different stirring, which might have been no more than a slow, steady current of air moving among the bushes behind her. She shivered involuntarily, but didn't look back. She came to the wall, stood still, measuring its height, jumped and got an arm across it, swung up a knee, squirmed up and over. She came down on her feet with a small thump in the grass on the other side, glanced back once at the guest house, crossed a path, and went on among the park trees. Within a few hundred yards, it became apparent that she had an escort. She didn't look around for them, but spread out to the right and left like a skirmish line, keeping abreast with her. Occasional shadows slid silently through patches of open, sunlit ground, disappearing again under the trees. Otherwise, there was hardly anyone in sight. Porte-Cochet's human residents appeared to make almost no personal use of the vast parkland spread out beneath their tower apartments, and its traffic moved over the airways, visible from the ground only as rainbow-hued ribbons which bisected the sky between the upper tower levels. An occasional private air car went by overhead. Wisps of thought which were not her own thoughts flicked through Telzey's mind from moment to moment as the silent line of shadows moved deeper into the park with her. She realized she was being sized up, judged, evaluated again. No more information was coming through. They had given her as much information as she needed. In the main, perhaps, they were simply curious now. This was the first human mind they'd been able to make heads or tails of, and that hadn't seemed deaf and silent to their form of communication. They were taking time out to study it. They'd been assured she would have something of genuine importance to tell them, and there was some derision about that, but they were willing to wait a little and find out. They were curious, and they liked games. At the moment, Telzey and what she might try to do to change their plan was the game on which their attention was fixed. 12 minutes passed before the talker on Telzey's wrist began to buzz. It continued to signal on and off for another few minutes, then stopped. Back in the guest house, they couldn't be sure whether she wasn't simply locked inside her room and refusing to answer them. but Telzey quickened her pace. The park's trees gradually became more massive, reached higher above her, stood spaced more widely apart. She passed through the morning shadow of the residential tower nearest the guest house and emerged from it presently on the shore of a small lake. On the other side of the lake, a number of dappled grazing animals, like long-necked, tall horses, lifted their heads to watch her. For some seconds they seemed only mildly interested, but then a breeze moved across the lake, crinkling the surface of the water, and as it touched the opposite shore, abrupt panic exploded among the grazers. They wheeled, went flashing away in effortless 20-foot strides, and were gone among the trees. Telzey felt a crawling along her spine. It was the first objective indication she'd had of the nature of the company she had brought to the lake, and while it hardly came as a surprise, for a moment her urge was to follow the example of the grazers. "Tick-Tock?" she whispered, suddenly a little short of breath. A single up and down purring note replied from the bushes on her right. T.T. was still around, for whatever good that might do. Not too much, Telzey thought, if it came to serious trouble, but the knowledge was somewhat reassuring, and this, meanwhile, appeared to be as far as she needed to get from the guest house. They'd be looking for her by air car presently, but there was nothing to tell them in which direction to turn first. She climbed the bank of the lake to a point where she was screened both by thick green shrubbery and the top of a single immense tree from the sky, sat down on some dry, mossy growth, took the law library from her belt, opened it, and placed it in her lap. Vague stirrings indicated that her escort was also settling down in an irregular circle about her, and the apprehension shivered on Telzey's skin again. It wasn't that their attitude was hostile. They were simply overawing, and no one could predict what they might do next. Without looking up, she asked a question in her mind. "Ready?" Sense of multiple acknowledgement, variously tinged, sardonic, interestingly amused, attentive, doubtful. Impatience quivered through it too, only tentatively held in restraint, and Telzey's forehead was suddenly wet. Some of them seemed on the verge of expressing disapproval with what was being done here. Her fingers quickly flicked in the index tape, and the stir of feelings about her subsided, their attention captured again for the moment. Her thoughts became to some degree detached, ready to dissect another problem in the familiar ways and present the answers to it. Not a very involved problem essentially, but this time it wasn't a school exercise. Her company waited, withdrawn, silent, aloof once more, while the index blurred, checked, blurred, and checked. Within a minute and a half she had noted a dozen reference symbols. She tapped in another of the pinhead tapes, glanced over a few paragraphs, licked salty sweat from her lip, and said in her thoughts, emphasizing the meaning of each detail of the sentence so that there would be no misunderstanding. This is the Federation law that applies to the situation which existed originally on this planet. There were no interruptions, no commenting thoughts, no intrusions of any kind as she went step by step through the section, turned to another one and another. In perhaps 12 minutes, she came to the end of the last one and stopped. Instantly, argument exploded about her. Telzey was not involved in the argument. In fact, she could grasp only scraps of it. Either they were excluding her deliberately, or the exchange was too swift, practiced, and varied to allow her to keep up. But their vehemence was not encouraging. And was it reasonable to assume that the Federation's laws would have any meaning for minds like these? Telzey snapped the library shut with fingers that had begun to tremble and placed it on the ground. Then she stiffened. In the sensations washing about her, a special excitement rose suddenly, a surge of almost gleeful wildness that choked away her breath. Awareness followed of a pair of malignant crimson eyes fastened on her, moving steadily closer, A kind of nightmare paralysis seized Telzey. They'd turned her over to that red-eyed horror. She sat still, feeling mouse-sized. Something came out with a crash from a thicket behind her. Her muscles went tight, but it was T.T. who rubbed a hard head against her shoulder, took another 3 stiff-legged steps forward and stopped between Telzey and the bushes on their right, back rigid, neck fur erect, tail twisting. Expectant silence closed in about them. The circle was waiting. In the greenery on the right, something made a slow, heavy stir. T.T.'s lips peeled back from her teeth. Her head swung towards the motion, ears flattening, transformed to a split, snarling demon mask. A long shriek ripped from her lungs, raw with fury, bloodlust, and challenge. The sound died away. For some seconds the tension about them held. Then came a sense of gradual relaxation mingled with a partly amused approval. Telzey was shaking violently. It had been, she was telling herself, a deliberate test. Not of herself, of course, but of T.T. And Tick-Tock had passed with honors. That her nerves had been half ruined in the process would seem a matter of no consequence to this rugged crew. She realized next that someone here was addressing her personally. It took a few moments to steady her jittering thoughts enough to gain a more definite impression than that. This speaker, she discovered then, was a member of the circle of whom she hadn't been aware before. The thought impressions came hard and cold as iron. A personage who was very evidently in the habit of making major decisions and seeing them carried out. The circle, its moment of sport over, was listening with more than a suggestion of deference. Tick-Tock, far from conciliated, green eyes still blazing, nevertheless was settling down to listen too. Telzey began to understand. Her suggestions, Iron Thoughts informed her, might appear without value to a number of foolish minds here, but he intended to see they were given a fair trial. Did he perhaps hear? He inquired next of the circle, throwing in a casual but horridly vivid impression of snapping spines and slashed, shaggy throats spouting blood. Any objection to that? Dead stillness all around. There was definitely no objection. Tick-Tock began to grin like a pleased kitten. That point having been settled in an orderly manner now, Iron Thoughts went on coldly to Telzey. What specifically did she propose they should do? End of section 2.